excited to have my friend and colleague Sylvia DeMott with me as we talk about how to go from surviving to thriving during the holiday season. But what I'd like to do is maybe start out. Sylvia, would you like to go ahead and introduce yourself?
Yeah, I'm Sylvia DeMott. I am the author of a book called Show Up for Yourself, Set Boundaries, Take Control, and Calm the Inner Storm. And I am also a licensed licensed therapist, and a leadership coach.
Wonderful. Yes. And my name is Shiroma Wilson. My work involves coaching, facilitating, and building courses to help multicultural professionals and socially conscious organizations with some of the biggest sociocultural challenges that they experience in both work and life. And I am also the author of Exceptional Futures, The Power of Identity to Design Positive Change, which is about discovering your own cultural identity, your unique cultural identity, and leverage it to create the positive change that you seek in your life. All right, so we created this session because we know that there are some stressors, right, that make the holiday season anything but fun. And I think you and I, when we started thinking about this session, we embarked on this course of let's have fun with this. And we want to infuse a little bit of fun into the holiday season. And our talk today really focuses on themes that we find in the winter holidays, but really it just can be applied for any time, right? When there's celebrations or family gatherings, there's always, meant to create a little bit of stress sometimes. So if anything, we thought we could create this little bit of more from a survival perspective to how do we actually enjoy the holiday season? How do we thrive during that season here? And so one of the things before we jump in, is that we are sharing our experiences and insights for educational purposes, but, it's really not meant to replace the full services of a mental health professional. So, you know what, if the holidays are bringing on all sorts of stress for you, we just want to encourage you to seek out the help and support that you need so that you can go from surviving to thriving during the holiday season. So I think we're going to be talking from our perspective in terms of when we work with clients, as well as when and also in our own lives, right? Some of the themes that we've seen, right, in terms of some of the challenges or the stressors that might come up during the holiday season. I thought maybe we can start off with something that's near and dear to your heart, Sylvia.
Yes.
The whole notion of people pleasing.
Yes, people pleasing is something. I am a recovering people pleaser, and I work with a lot of people pleasers, people who have difficulty saying no and want to really don't feel comfortable disappointing others or feel very guilty when they do. And I just want to take one step back and say, I wrote the book that I did because I think it's so important for people to show up for themselves and take their needs into consideration. And that oftentimes people think that they're they might hurt the relationship when they say what's on their, when they assert what they need, and also sometimes disappoint people. But the truth is that we really need to show up for ourselves and show up in our relationships so that we and that's a good thing for us. It will help serve a relationship well to do that. So people pleasing, though, is something that I think many of us have been conditioned to do from early ages, and it's something that has helped us in the past, but may not serve us so well when we're adults. And it's wanting to, and on the darker side of people pleasing is wanting to kind of control the outcome of a situation, maybe wanting to please someone else to protect ourselves from having to feel disappointment, protect other people from feeling disappointment and ourselves potentially from feeling guilt. So saying yes, to parties that we really don't want to go to, don't even have the time or resources to do, saying yes to things that don't really work for us, not truly saying what's on our mind around things, and feeling then a lot of resentment around it. Those are kind of behaviors of people pleasing.
Yes. I mean, I look at it also from kind of like the socio-cultural lens, right? And so I just want to call out the fact that, so many of us, right, we're conditioned to do this, right? So from the time that we're young, where it's like always, we're kind of, there's these societal norms or these like even, these norms within our family structure, right, in which we have to show up. And many of us are conditioned to be a people pleaser, in a sense. And I really love what you just said about like how sometimes that doesn't serve us as adults, right?
Yes.
It's amazing, like even in like organizational settings, I see that kind of carrying through in so many ways when there's kind of this like power structure, right? This sometimes like you find yourself like exhibiting some of the behaviors of like trying to please others, right? And it's really interesting because sometimes I see this like that really comes out a lot during the holiday season, right? Because you're like, oh, well, we kind of revert to what we know. And I also see that happening with some of my clients where they end up like signing up for all these extra things because they feel like, oh, this is the best for the organization, and they take on all this extra work, to help maintain kind of like the harmony within the team or even like within their family, and there's just so much. Then to your point, there's all this resentment that forms, like, because when you feel like you're not being sufficiently appreciated for all this extra work that you're doing. Yeah. So.
No, I agree with you completely. And I think there's a lot of expectation, especially around this time of year, to take on a lot.
Yes.
And, just what's coming up for me as you're talking is that it's important to kind of recognize, like, what are the cultural expectations that we're kind of trying to live up to, that maybe don't serve us completely and don't serve the organization either. Like if we're burning ourselves out at both ends, how helpful is that? To the organization.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it's not helpful to ourselves. It's not helpful to the organization. It's not helpful to maybe our families. But I really appreciate what you just said about cultural expectations, right? So that, so growing up in, for me, I grew up in Japan, and I just remember like the winter holidays were this like huge arc, right? So it starts with kind of like American Thanksgiving, because my mother is American and my father's working now in Japanese. And so it would start with American Thanksgiving and then like stumbles into the Christmas holiday season, and then stumbled into 3 full days of New Year's, right? So it was always like all these, these cultural and social, not only expectations, but obligations that came up. And I just remember like, it was so stressful for all of us, and sometimes good stress is stress, right? But it was always stressful for all of us to have to deal with all these holidays all kind of like crammed together.
Yeah.
I'm
hearing like stress have to, like, that's one of the things about, I think if you're a people pleaser, it's helpful to kind of pay attention to what you're telling yourself, the stories you're telling yourself. And especially if you're hearing yourself say things like, I should do this, I have to do this, then that might be a sign to kind of just take a moment and step back and like notice what you're saying, and really maybe like breathing a little bit and asking yourself, is it true that I have to go to 3 different events on one day or buy this certain amount of gifts for someone else? Or, or is this like an expectation that, and something old or not necessary,
right,
that I can let go of?
Yeah. There's a couple of things that are coming up for me as I'm hearing this. One is that there's this notion of a social contract, right? So when you're fulfilling your obligation or your expectations, then all harmony happens, right? But I think the one thing that we should always remember about, like when we think about like tradition and culture and how things play out, is that culture and traditions always evolve, right? And so to your point, right?
Yes.
Sometimes we don't consciously examine that, right? And so there might be some elements where you can, just look at the situation and say, all right, do we need to be continuing with this, right? Is this helpful, or is this hurting everybody, right? And so I'm sure you've heard this maybe from family members. I always heard like, well, that's the way it's always been, right? You've always have to do it this way, right? And then I just remember, like, I look back on like my own childhood and how things evolved, and I'm realizing, no, actually things evolved and changed. Nobody just talked about it, right? and
Mm.
and we just
That's
keep.
really interesting what you're saying, that no one talked about it.
No, it just kind of there were slight alterations that always happen. But I think we all, as adults, sometimes we kind of crystallize in our mind, like, this is the way it's supposed to be. Like and we try to make, and sometimes generationally, we want to continue, like, from one generation to another, to maybe maintain the traditions. And then you realize, well, wait, maybe the traditions have evolved, but we don't consciously think
Yeah.
about that.
What comes up for me too is that just how many families nowadays are blended families too. And it just, so from a, in that you can't, like, it's important to not be so rigid that you have to do everything in a certain type of way. And that, like, when we're not like really like paying attention to like the reality of the life that we live, then we're just like boxing ourselves up and creating stress for ourselves. Like, if you have like, you can't just do like, we're not able to be everywhere at one time or do everything that we want to. And so like it's important to have some flexibility to kind of to see what you're talking about, like that it's that that things do evolve, and even when we don't think that they do, they do,
Right.
and it's okay to flow with them.
You know what I love? I mean, I love that movement that you put together. It was almost like
Yeah.
integrativeness, right? It's like you can bring things together and create new traditions in a sense, right? But I love what you said about blended families, right? That it's like sometimes we just need to step back from rigidity and just kind of, maybe
Mhm.
even form new traditions together. Do you have any guidance or advice on like families that do come together, and blend a new tradition?
I think just to be willing to be kind of curious and maybe intentional, and to see like what makes sense like for you this year or right now, like to try like what do you want, like what are the intentions and also the traditions that you want to keep, and what do you want to let go of, and see like what are like the feelings too that you want to have,
Right.
like during this time of year or any time of year, like, and see if you can do decide to do things that will allow you to have either that intention or that feeling, like that feeling of community or like connection, or that feeling of like joy or calm or like
Right.
appreciation or serving,
Right. Right.
and like and kind of like let go of like what that, like that it has to look a certain way.
Mm.
And
Yeah.
I also say be willing to disappoint some people too.
Hmm.
It's okay to disappoint some people.
Right. I love what you just said in terms of like disappointing people, right? Because I think that sometimes like we put that burden on ourselves and say, well, we are, if we don't show up completely, like if we're not all in, we are letting people down or we're disappointing others. And I think one of the things that is really interesting about this whole, when as you're talking about even this like blending and integration and creating new traditions, is that it is about communication,
Hmm.
and I love what you just said about like the feelings that you want people to have, right?
Yeah.
And all too often we're just so, focused on having our heads down and like running through the
Hmm.
holidays, and we're like, we survived, and hoping for that moment of calm and quiet when it doesn't
Mm-hmm.
happen, right? And we wonder why. So I love how we can be intentional about that. right? So, showing up for ourselves also might mean like letting go of some of that control that we want over a situation, right? And
Yeah, we
allowing
can't
others.
control, literally we can't control anyone else but ourselves. So oftentimes we can't even control ourselves. So like we can control ourselves, but we we sometimes have limited control over ourselves. So like we have to make our own decisions about what's going to work for us. And the, when we're a people pleaser, we're trying to control others, like by like controlling the outcome. Like by trying to like please other people, we're trying to control them.
Mm.
And the more that we can recognize that we don't have control over other people and that they may still like not be okay with the decisions we're making. Maybe they actually will be okay, but maybe they also might be disappointed or have some mixed feelings around it. That's good.
Yeah, I mean, and that I think all too often we don't see control as being a theme, right? And I think this also kind of spills into the whole notion of having everything perfect, like that notion of
Mm-hmm.
perfectionism, right? It's like we
Yeah,
want to have the perfect holidays, and perfection in our mind looks a specific way, right? Or has been kind of
like a certain number of people have to be. We have to be with a certain number of people
right.
doing certain things on certain days.
Yes, and it has to look a certain way too, right? So
Yes, of course.
yeah.
We
So
have to like get our hair done and like
right, right, right,
and like
right.
and we cannot have any arguments during the holidays
Oh, of
or
course
feel
not.
any kind of sense of irritation at all about something that someone says to us that maybe we only see once a year.
Well, it's you bring up a really important point because, and I think this goes back to kind of like the cultural and the societal expectations that come up, right? Because I mean, I'm listening, I'm driving around, I'm listening to all this holiday music in the car, and it's almost like it kind of dictates how you should be feeling, right? One is like, you have to always be home. It has to, and it's funny, I grew up in the subtropics, but I always still imagine the winter holidays having snow, right? And so
Yes.
and I'm thinking to myself, no, there's some reconciliation that needs to happen between what reality is and what's imagined in a sense, what the ideal in a sense is. So being kind
Right.
of aware of that, it's like, how do you reconcile kind of the societal expectations and like what they consider to be the ideal versus, and also your version of ideal, and then
Hmm.
what's reality, right? What
And maybe that means lowering your expectations
yeah.
around different things that you're doing or around how you actually feel. Recognizing that you might get a little bit irritable when you're at a family event with people you haven't, some people, some of whom you haven't seen maybe for an entire year or not, that they might ask questions of you that might be bothersome. Like, I was talking to someone who said that they're he's getting asked left and right, when is he getting engaged? When is he getting engaged? When is he getting engaged?
Yeah,
Or you might be like, and that can be irritating
right. Yeah.
and put a lot of pressure on you too.
Absolutely. It puts a lot of pressure on you. And I think there's two things that we can talk about when it comes to dealing with that, right? So one is
Hmm.
we have to think about intentionality, right? So sometimes, and it's funny because I think we create these narratives for ourselves, right? Saying like, oh, they're asking me because, and then my not having a sufficient response is somehow a failure on my part, right? And
Yes.
and so understanding like, are people just curious, or is there something else going on here, right? And I think the other thing that what's also important to know is like back to the whole control issue. It's like, how much do we want to be able to maybe even rehearse our answer ahead of time, right?
That's a great idea that you have. And in my work, I often do like role playing with other people so that they can rehearse answers that they want to have. And
Yeah,
also just maybe have some answers that kind of come easily to them
yeah, yeah.
to handle things.
Yeah. And I think the other thing to add on to that is like when people are also kind of like sometimes unconsciously looking at your reaction, right? So if you do, so back to the engagement question, it's like, we don't know,
Yeah.
and that just kind of diffuses the whole thing rather than, spinning in your mind about that and trying to create
Yes.
meaning behind it, right? And
Yes.
so just, I guess, forgiving yourself in that realm and just say, sometimes you don't have all the answers, and that's okay.
Yes. And then what I'm hearing you say, Victoria, is like what you're doing right now is like self-talk, like
Mhm.
kind self-talk to yourself.
Yeah.
And that's one of the most important things that someone can do for themselves is, like we might have like some automatic responses that come out when we're kind of in stressful situations,
Mhm.
but then we can kind of like be able to kind of notice that when we can notice that and then talk to ourselves in a kind way,
Mhm.
that can just kind of that's how we're like taking care of ourselves, really kind of showing up for ourselves, um, and kind of creating some sense of calmness for ourselves too.
Yeah, I love that. Think when we talk about family gatherings or even just, even like professional gatherings or even neighborhood gatherings, sometimes we also think about it as in terms of an all or nothing situation.
Hmm.
So back to the rehearsing bit, maybe having an action plan, right, as you go into some of these, to understand. And you don't have to stay for until the bitter end, right? You can just make an appearance and then maybe assess for yourself, do I stay or do I go or do I not even show up? Right. And be
Yes.
content with your answer there.
Yeah, I like what you're saying a lot. And when you're saying neighbor, I'm going to a my neighborhood book club has like we go out to dinner in December, kind of like a celebration, holiday celebration. And um so I'm thinking about that too for myself. I'm also thinking like how much am I going to drink as well? Like,
Mhm.
and do I want to like, and I'm pretty like careful around that too. Like, I mean, if I drive, then I need to be careful around that. But also just from a standpoint, like, you know, to take care of myself in this process, like if I drink more than like one glass, I'm probably going to end up being tired. Maybe I'll like, I don't think I'll say things. I don't know, just to kind of pay attention to that too.
Right. Yeah.
Like paying attention to like like when you're rehearsing or thinking, like you can be intentional, not only like in terms of how long you want to go to an event, but also like whether you want to drink anything, whether you want to, what you want to eat that will help to kind of help you feel better. Like,
Mm-hmm.
like, do I want to eat like 10 brownies even or cookies, holiday cookies, or am I gonna like how intense, like what will like how can I go into this and like feel good when I leave it too?
Yeah, no, what you just said is so true. Like, how do you want to feel, right, at the end of the evening? And that's just
Yes.
such an important point. Because I think for some of us, we just, again, where it's not intentional. We just walk in and then all of a sudden the 10 holiday cookies get consumed or, number of drinks get consumed and then we feel terrible. And so
And
that
this happens especially like if we're like literally rushing to that event too, then it's much more likely to happen like that.
exactly, exactly. And also like, there's definitely some flexibility to let things unfold, right? So if
Hmm.
you are enjoying yourself and you want to make a conscious decision to say, all right, well, I may have that extra drink, but I need a safe way to get home, or I need, this is, or make sure that there's a, designated driver or something, somebody that can help you in this process. Um, and I just, yeah, but to your point, it's like, how do you want to feel the next morning, or how do you
Hmm.
want to feel at the end of the party? Do you want to, do you feel like it was a stressful experience? Do you feel like, just physically terrible? Like how do you, what do you want the outcome to be? And then
Hmm.
as you step into your time for that evening. Yeah.
Hmm. I think what we're saying is that you get to have like make choices for yourself. Like you get to choose
Yes.
different kind of like things that will help you to feel better and help you feel the way that you want to feel.
Yes. Yeah.
And
No,
if you're feeling stressed, you might want to go to the bathroom. Like I know it sounds kind of silly that I'm saying this, but go to the bathroom or like step out and like literally like take a few breaths
Yes.
or take some time to like decompress by yourself.
Yeah. No, you bring up such an important point because as I get older, I'm finding that I'm more, you know, I started out as very much an extrovert. Like my batteries would be charged as I would go into these parties. But I mean, as I get older, I'm like, oh, you know, constant stimulation like that
Hmm.
is like is stressful. So taking a break, right? Pacing yourself, going,
Yes.
being able to go outside or to the restroom and just excuse yourself, take a couple of deep breaths to regroup, right? And then you can make a conscious decision. How much longer do I want to stay? Right.
Hmm.
And how, you know, how do I want to show up for the rest of my time here? So
This is especially important if you're a highly sensitive person. So
uh,
I'm a highly sensitive person, and I write about that in my book too. And it's like 15 to 20% of the population is that. It's an innate trait, and it just means that you like you process your surroundings like in greater detail. And as a result of that, it's really important to take time to decompress.
right. Yeah.
But
And
in this, like during the holiday season, all of us are taking in too much potentially. Like it's just because like just like there's just a lot more expected of us.
mhm.
And so like we all need to take some breaks to just like decompress and kind of like check in with ourselves.
Mhm. I would say, so when we say decompress, is it so one so some of the guidance I give to folks who
Hmm.
is to like, say making sure that at the tail end of an evening, right? Just making sure that you can go off on your own for a little bit, like, within your house or something, just take some deep breaths to kind of like, bring some of that stimulation,
Hmm.
down. But I'm wondering if you have any other uh piece of guidance or pieces of advice for somebody
Yeah.
who's highly sensitive.
Yeah. I think just being aware of that it's so important to do this and that you might even be taking on some of other people's emotions
Yeah.
and allowing yourself to recognize that you don't have to do that. People like I mean, if you can be out in nature, like that's a wonderful way to decompress.
Mm-hmm.
Um, if it okay, I'm gonna go backwards and say like before you, like if you're, for instance, you don't even have to be just anyone. If you want to protect your energy, you can do some very basic things to do that. And one of them might be to zip it up, like literally like zip up your energy and like imagine that you have this bubble around you that you can you know and you do this before you go into anything.
Yeah. That is such an important point. I mean, even just that motion, right, of what you're
Hmm.
saying is kind of like you're kind of connecting like the action, the physicality of it to like, all right, I'm creating my space here,
Hmm.
right?
My space.
Yeah.
I get to choose what I let into my bubble.
I love that. Yeah. And that goes back to like the intentionality, the choice. As we
Yes.
continue, send you off to the holidays, is that there is the sense of like, hey, we have, really being able to be aware of some of these triggers for us, these stressors, having some intentionality around that, right? And
Yes.
I hope that, we were able to give folks some sort of tips and techniques to raise their awareness and also just set these positive intentions for the holiday season. So yeah, I think that pretty much wraps it up for us. I had fun talking with you
I
about
had fun
this.
too.
So our theme for this year is fun. So we're
Yes.
we're, we're going to continue this theme together. So okay, so I just want to thank everybody for their attention and for joining us, and we hope that this information that we shared with you today was kind of helpful. Couple of things. Please feel free to stay in touch. So our contact information in terms of our websites, our LinkedIn profiles are going to be in the comments section below. So feel free to scroll down and get some keep in touch with us. And if you want to, see more of that, just let us know. We'd love to hear from you. All right. Well, have a wonderful holiday season, and we wish you a wonderful winter holiday season and a wonderful new year. Thank you.
Yes.